here he is, our Wednesday regular, NHL insider from TSN and the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast, still awaiting his big feature story in the Toronto Star. It's Mr. Darren Dreger.
Caused a huge rift on the Ray and Dregs podcast, I'm sure.
Yes, it definitely did. Yes. Well, I don't think that I have the same business or family choices that our good friend and colleague Ray Ferraro has, but you know what? It was a nice article, wasn't it? And instantly, as soon as I read it, number one, I did not know what was coming out. Again, I mean, Bruce Arthur didn't tip me off, which is fine. Ray didn't tip me off. So I'm one of those old school guys, and I suspect you guys are as well. I like putting my hands on a newspaper. So I get the Toronto Star delivered to my home every single morning. My wife likes to do the crosswords and all the puzzles, and then she foists everything else off to me, and that's our morning ritual. We have a coffee, and we pour through the paper. So I think I was doing morning radio in Toronto or Montreal, and I'm doing my radio thing, and she has put the Ferraro feature in front of my face. I'm like, interesting. I was distracted by it, and then I read it, of course, and like you guys, I'm sure. I mean, I applauded Ray, and he admits that when the interview started, I mean, he knew sort of what direction it was going to take because he had announced that after 14 years, he was essentially leaving TSN. So it was a bit of a background piece. But then he said, as I talked to Bruce and things, started to unwind here a little bit, I felt myself opening up in a way that I didn't expect going into the interview. But isn't that the beauty of Ray and how he wears his heart on his sleeve? And telling the story that he did is just old-fashioned honesty, and I loved it.
Just one more comment on this piece. We don't make this all about Ray, although we could.
He'll join us Friday.
He will love that, yeah.
But why do you think his voice resonates? Because it feels like he's been an analyst for 30 years, and he hasn't. It's been a dozen, which is really not that long. But why do you think when he speaks, people listen? Because we've had a lot of analysts through our lives, color commentators. But, man, do people love his credibility. Yeah. But why more than the next guy? It just seems like there's a different level for him.
I mean, it's a unique skill set, Blake. I think you're bang on there. It starts with brutal honesty. Ray can be very critical when he has to, but he does it in a way that if the player heard it and saw it and had just lived it, he'd go, yeah, that's fair. That's a fair assessment of what just went on the ice. But he doesn't do it in a way that speaks over anyone's head. So if you're sitting on your couch and you're watching the game, Ray has a keen eye. Like he'll spot something that we wouldn't spot, a little detail, but then he weaves a story around it and you're like, okay, I get it. Now that makes sense to me. And he's got a real sharp sense of humor as well. So, I mean, look, he's not falling off the face of the earth. He's going to continue to do what he does on ESPN and on a bigger platform. But,
more importantly, Sekeres and Price, Dregs. More importantly, Sekeres and Price.
Of course. But I also hope people understand that aside from the Leaf games regionally, like Ray loved doing the World Juniors. Loved it because the stories were endless and it was just hockey in its purest sense in many ways. So, but you know what? Family trumps everything else, right? And he spent enough time away from his family over the years that he needed to make this call.
For me, the 3 A's, anticipation, animation, and articulation. Ray's got them all in spades when he does a game. No doubt. Let's move on. Vancouver Canucks. Connor Garland, a surprise scratch last night. Darren, what can you tell us?
Well, I mean, what I was told was that it was an earned healthy scratch, which is an indictment individually on the player, of course, right? But beyond that, because of the status, quote unquote, of Connor Garland, it was an opportunity to deliver the message to the team as well. Now, let's see whether or not they're going to absorb the message. It didn't appear to against the Columbus Blue Jackets because it's the same old 4 games into the regular season. And, the ability to protect the lead is just something that the Vancouver Canucks haven't mastered to this point of the regular season. I'm more interested in what the long-term, bigger picture future of Connor Garland looks like. And it smells to me like he doesn't fit the eye of Bruce Boudreau. He doesn't. When's the last time Connor Garland was given any opportunity on a power play?
Been a while.
I don't know, you guys, you tell me. And, he's a smallish player. That's, it's obvious. But there's something about his game that doesn't mesh with Bruce. So what's the end result of this? The guy has contract, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. And the head coach doesn't have the same contract. So poking around, not to build this into a bigger story than what it is. I was told this morning that this was essentially a one-off, and Garland is going to be back into the lineup. And, I'm not suggesting there's a rift in the coaching staff or management. I think that everybody embraced the idea of the healthy scratch of Connor Garland, but the end result was the same. So maybe you try something different and see if it works.
You know what's interesting, and our guts, I think, told us what you just said as well, but I didn't know much about Garland before he got to the Canucks. He's a really unique player. Like very few. He's a bit unorthodox in how he moves about the ice and where he puts himself. But Dregs, what's the criticism we hear about Bruce Boudreau? Lack of structure, a little unorthodox. Like you would think that they would actually be a match made in heaven. But you're absolutely right. There doesn't seem to be an affinity for his play because he's not often in the top six, not often in that top power play unit.
No, and therein lies a problem. If it's age old though, isn't it? A good player will be criticized, and Ray always reminds us of this. The good player will say, "Well, I'll be a better player. I might be a great player if you play me with better players and you give me better situational time." Maybe Garland, feels that way. I haven't talked directly with Connor. Disappointed that he was a healthy scratch. I think that's an understatement. Has he had meetings with Bruce Boudreau? Yeah, he's had meetings with Bruce Boudreau. But again, you're stuck in a scenario here because if you're management, if one healthy scratch leads to more, and as I said a minute ago, it doesn't feel like that's likely to happen, at least on the short term. But now you're devaluing an asset. And we can look at the Vancouver Canucks and what they need. And there's nothing wrong with packaging a player like Connor Garland via trade as long as you're getting back something that's going to make the club better. Well, when the guy's sitting in a press box, even for a short-term period, all that does, now you got the vultures circling. They're not trying to make a fair deal. They're just, trying to pick your pocket. If not, in trying to steal Connor Garland, maybe it comes in a different way.
You mentioned the coaching staff, Dregs. How hot is the seat under Boudreau after an 0-3-1 start? Like, are we looking at games already that are testers for this coaching staff and its longevity?
It feels early for that, Matt. But when you say we as a media, for sure we are. And it's pretty obvious why we would. The time that the Canucks took to announce that, Bruce Boudreau's coming back. Didn't give him an extension, so he's in the final year of his deal. He's making more money than he made last year. But it was, okay, you did a good job. Was this a coach bump? Or are you going to do as good a job next year and earn the extension? And I think we can appreciate from a business standpoint why that was the position of the Canucks. So here they start. They're 0-4. Making history for all the wrong reasons in protecting multi-goal leads and all of that. It's really young to be talking about firing a coach unless there's a lot more to it. And I certainly don't have the evidence to support that. I was told last week by management that, they believe Bruce is a good coach. But what if it stretches to 10 games? And then it stretches to 15. Well, how do you look much beyond that? I think we all, when we did the preview show, we talked about whether we believed the Vancouver Canucks are a playoff worthy or a playoff contending team. And I think both Ray and I said they are, but let's see. And who are they knocking out if they're getting into that picture? Well, you cannot start 5-10 games of the regular season and lose those points the way the Vancouver Canucks are losing. You can't change the players. We know they need a defenseman. We're probably going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So if that doesn't resolve itself in the near future, what are you left with? But I always say the same thing, and it's common sense. If you're dumping Bruce Boudreau and his contract, you got to pay him out for the rest of the year.
Right.
Who are you replacing him with? Is Mike Yeo, as an example, going to be better than what you have? And there is a guy out there. His name is Barry Trotz.
Yep.
Does ownership have the stomach to scratch that check for $5 million plus per year on a 4 or 5 year deal?
Dregs, this is the team that traded away Jason Dickinson and his rather expensive on the scale contract and had to pay a price to do that. They've even kicked tires on trading away the financial burden of the Michael Furlan contract.
Right.
Would this owner pay for 3 coaches to coach this fall? Like, I mean, that's what I can't reconcile. Yeah. I could see him making the knee-jerk hockey decision to move on from the coach. And so that dovetails. And when you answer that, also answer, customarily, if Mike Yeo got into an interim position, would you have to? Is it hockey custom that you give him a bump when he gets that head coaching job? No, you just
not.
Yeah,
not necessarily, Blake. And what they would probably say is maybe there's a small bump, but normally they would say, look, man, we're giving you an opportunity here. You'll be rewarded if things go well. Unless there's been a provision that's been applied as a possibility. And I doubt that's the case with Mike or anyone else for that matter. I think of Andrew Burnett, though, right? And what's going on with the New Jersey Devils and whether or not he might have a provision that's something similar to that. But you're talking about a guy who just left the bench of the Florida Panthers as a head coach. It's a slippery one. So now to go back to the Aquilinis. Frugal? Yeah, I mean, most owners are in pro sport, depending on what we're talking about. But this is an ownership group that I think is fairly invested in the players that they have and the coaching staff, and bit down and made some tough coaching decisions. And we know, because history tells us, that, look, Jim Rutherford doesn't end up with the Vancouver Canucks if Francesco Aquilini isn't consulting with Jim Rutherford before hiring Bruce Boudreau. That's what happened. We know this, right? Mm-hmm. He was thinking of bringing in Bruce Boudreau. He has a relationship with Jim Rutherford. What do you think of Bruce Boudreau? I think he's a good coach. Would you hire him? Yeah, I'd probably hire him. I mean, that's in essence how Bruce landed with the Vancouver Canucks. But it is a business. And if I'm an owner, I'm sitting there going, all right, so you want me to pay 3 coaches. How can you convince me that whether it's Barry Trotz or anyone else coming in taking over is going to make this group better, or is it going to cost me more in the long run because you're going to come back to me as management and say we need better players? Well, better players are more expensive, and we know there's a salary cap and all that. I just, from an ownership perspective, that's why I'm hesitant to put a timeline on Bruce Boudreau as head coach, and more interested in the onus being on the players and seeing if they can kind of work their way through this tough patch.
The one thing I'll say about the Aquilinis, to their credit, with the exception of that one summer where they let Markstrom and Tanev walk, they have financed hockey operations to every last
Even in that summer, Matt, they were to the cap.
Hockey, hockey operations. Yeah. The second thing I'll say is I do think they fought it a little bit with Travis Green last year. They had just re-signed him to an extension. I didn't think they wanted to eat it at the first sign of trouble. They waited till December. I would suspect that something similar would take place here with Bruce, although they absolutely cannot get buried again early in the playoff race, so perhaps a little more urgency. Darren, last week you sort of intimated to us that if things did get off to a poor start, you didn't think Rutherford and Alvin would sit idly by. We know they need a defenseman, but that puts them in good company, including after watching Insider Trading yesterday with a bunch of their Canadian counterparts in the National Hockey League. Tell us about the possibility, if any, of a trade to help the defense, help the Canucks, and who they'd have to beat out here.
Yeah, I mean, they're hungry. They're looking. There's no doubt about that. But, Toronto has Jake Muzzin, who's going to be out long-term now, and that goes along with the woes of the Maple Leafs on that back end. Ottawa has been looking for an upgrade or an add to their top four, one or two, to be fair. Montreal is specific. They want a right shot, although they kick tires and continue on Pierre-Olivier Joseph, who, with the Pittsburgh Penguins, is intriguing to me. Young guy, first-round draft pick of the Arizona Coyotes. Now, Pittsburgh has 9 NHL defensemen, so that's why they're a team that probably Vancouver is swirling about, right? For obvious reasons with Patrick Allvin and Jimmy. Calgary has a glut there. LA, Rob Blake on the Rain Dregs podcast flat out said, we're open for business, but in a good way, right? Like they feel like they have to approach the all-in philosophy because of Jonathan Quick, because of Drew Doughty, because of Anze Kopitar. So whether it's a defenseman or a forward or both, I mean, LA is open for business. So the problem that you have is that you've got so many teams looking for the same type of defenseman. That defenseman right now, other than Jake Chychrun, isn't available. And even Chychrun really, at the asking price that Bill Armstrong and the Coyotes continue to push on, he's not really available. I mean, he's, now teams want to see him play. How healthy is he when he comes back? And he's real close to that. So you're looking at Danny DeKeyser. You're looking at Hickey. You're looking at Demers. And that's on the short term. If you want to look bigger picture, as you get, and I'm reading off a text message from another GM, by the way, who was part of, doing my due diligence yesterday, said, so via trade, if you're looking towards a deadline, if Chychrun doesn't go, then maybe he becomes more affordable then. What about John Klingberg? Could be a big name at the deadline. Other deadline names, Shattenkirk, Gostisbehere, Soucy, Stetcher, Severson, Kulikov, guys like that. So how many of those players are an add or a help to the Vancouver Canucks? And how many of those guys are available right now? And that's the issue that all these Canadian teams and any team in the market for a defenseman are dealing with.
Yeah, no, I've done Edmonton and Ottawa radio recently, and they've also mentioned their teams poking around on defense. It is the commodity they can't get enough of at the NHL level. Drags, thanks for this, my friend. Have a good week. We'll catch up next Wednesday.
All right, guys. You too. Thank you.